So, Oscar, I think it's a good place to start with you because you're the CEO of DHL Supply Chain, which I believe is the largest logistics company in the world. So I thought it would be a good start to have you give us kind of a macro overview of where our supply chains stand. I think we all in this room and outside the room experienced, the I guess fragility of supply chains during the worst of the pandemic. And it really revealed where some of the strains are in uncertain times. And then, of course, we're going through certain geopolitical issues, which are also leading to reshoring and potential deglobalization. So from your perspective, where are we now today?
Yeah, good. Yeah, and indeed, I think 4 years ago, I still had to explain what a supply chain was.
Right.
I think by now everybody wants to know how the supply chain is doing.
Exactly right.
So that really,
did you ever think we would be at that point?
No, exactly. No, I would not have imagined that. But and indeed, so where we are now in supply chains, and I think I can build on some of the points that were made earlier before the break, where you well, one thing that is clearly happening is what I call, just to add a new term, omnisourcing, meaning that our customers, our partners, would no longer place their bets on one single source point for any critical part of their products. And that's effectively what you see happening. So that means that whether you now call that China Plus or any of the other names, it basically means it drives complexity of supply chains, because it means that you have more sourcing points to build the same thing and to move into the same supply chain. So that's one element that you see clearly happening. And yes, that also has to do with the geopolitical part. It has to do with all the unexpected things that might be happening. So that's one element. The other element in supply chains, what you clearly see is the urge towards more digitalization of supply chains. Whether that is the digitalization as in data and using data, as in using more AI, which we're going to talk about in a second, as in using more robotic solutions to also make sure that we have a physical flow which is more guaranteed. So that's an element which you clearly see. Another complicator, because this is a simplification, but another complicator is obviously the big trend on e-commerce.
E-commerce, right.
Where e-commerce, we always think about B2C, but B2B is just as much there. There is no single company anymore that doesn't have an e-commerce channel, which has different requirements of a supply chain, because it has less stock points in the supply chain, and therefore it responds faster to trends and to needs and to seasonalities, and it's another complicating factor of supply chains overall. And then the other big element, which is obviously the sustainability element, and how do we decarbonize supply chains, which is a big element, which is not necessarily, it's a bit contradicting with some of the points, but data and sustainability are very closely connected as well. And then it also then sort of looks at new areas, new geographical areas.
Right.
So, for instance, one of the things that probably is relevant also for today's discussion, we recently closed a joint venture with Aramco to create an entity that optimizes for the energy and industry sector in the Middle East, the supply chains, using better data, focusing on sustainability agenda, but also has a big element of automation. So to really modernize that supply chain right from the start in a new strategic area.
And we'll talk more about that in a second, but that will begin, you just signed letters of agreement, I believe, and have some regulatory approval. That will begin when?
So that will begin beginning of next year, once we have all the approvals done and all of that. And then that will be setting up, and it has a first element of really modernizing the supply chain, in this case starting in Saudi Arabia, but then from there it becomes a Middle East-wide solution.
Right.
We have similar type of business in Oman, which was mentioned earlier. I've been there. So it is a Middle East-wide solution, which will start from January onwards.
Dr. Martinez, you've studied supply chains, and we talked a little bit in one of our phone calls earlier about what the pandemic really revealed. Give us your perspective on how supply chains have needed to adapt and will need to adapt.
Well, so that everyone is on the same page, what happened in the pandemic is that we all discovered that the majority of the ports were analog, and therefore they couldn't predict how many e-commerce orders we were all placing at home, buying all kinds of things. And that the analog world is really tough to manage when you have, oversupply, because you have no idea which ships are coming, if they're empty, if they're full of things. That was the pandemonium. And where artificial intelligence is now creating inroads is basically serving the big change in manufacturing. Right now, manufacturers want to automatize between 60 to 70% of anything that can be predicted and prescripted. It's a huge percentage. And obviously, they are in need of anything that they do, build it with decarbonization strategies, which is how it is affecting the supply chain, it's affecting packaging. You have companies like Mondi, the largest paper and pulp packager of the world, now designing packaging with artificial intelligence to make it super effective. And you move along the chain and you get all the way to smart transport, smart ports, the need to make them energy efficient. And artificial intelligence has superpowers, and the biggest one is optimization. Anything that you can predict, for example, needs of capital, stock inventories, you transform warehouses from two-dimensional analog worlds into third-party fulfillment centers that receive packaging but never sits there gathering dust. You just ship it out, whether it's B2B or B2C. So this dynamism is really going to change the landscape of supply chain in the next 5 to 10 years. And this is where the opportunity is. The all ports that traditionally have been handling the hubs are now going to allow the entrance of new parties that will start with a blank page of super tech. And that's the opportunity.
That's particularly the opportunity, I think you would say, in the GCC and the wider Middle East, right? So.
Yeah.
Matteo, you're based in Riyadh for McKinsey, so you work with a variety of clients globally, I'm sure, and in the region. What are you seeing as the changes that are happening in these industries of supply chain and logistics in the region?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Mark, and then thanks for having me here. There is a clear need of localization. If you take the agenda that the GCC country has, in particular in this case, and look, I'm based in Saudi, in Riyadh, there is a need of regionalizing and localizing manufacturing. There is a huge demand. If you think about the construction agenda that the GCC country has, they have billions of dollars going to be spent over the next 5 to 10 years, right? And the need of local manufacturing and local supply is very, very high, right? From material, from equipment, and including human capital, labor. So there is a big need of creating a manufacturing hub in the region. That needs come with challenges, right? Because at the speed where they're going, right, it's very difficult for private company to keep up. So for example, take the example of industrial cities that are currently created, NEOM in Oxagon, right? Or you take, for example, the King Abdullah Economic City close to Jeddah. Those become big cities, industrial cities, which will have an integrated almost supply chain, shipping and manufacturing at a very high standard, both in terms of digitalization, but also sustainable energy, right? They're designed by bringing sustainable energy from the beginning. So all of this agenda is creating a lot of pull from investors, right? Both private and also other companies that want to take part of that journey. That will also help them to almost leapfrog from a as a traditional type of supply chain and manufacturing to something which, only with green feed you are able to achieve.
Right. Right. I think that concept of leapfrogging is really important to think about, because there aren't a lot of legacy systems and infrastructure, and they can build, and these countries, to varying degrees, have a lot of capital to put to work, as well as investors coming in. Oscar, the example that you cited earlier, this new deal with Aramco, how does that fit in with what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think it very nicely builds on that point, because what we will be doing there is create the latest of the latest. To share some detail, those will be 5 very large logistics centers spread over the area. It will be semi-automated with the latest automation types. It will have optimized flows between them, so you actually reduce the emission. It will have indeed, from a data perspective, because yes, we use data analytics and we use AI to optimize already today, but that we will use the latest to implement there, because indeed you have the possibility that we basically build it from scratch, so we can all use all the latest technologies and innovations that we've had into that specific business, and it will therefore help to leapfrog the supply chain management in that region, to then connect to all the various projects we're having, and as you mentioned, that there's a lot of capital available, so we can move fast. There's a lot of eagerness and to get this done, and will to get this done fast, right. And therefore we actually see that there's a lot of opportunity. And if you invest in efficient supply chains, link that to your point about efficient ports and data, then you can actually create a very competitive environment to work in.
So this brings up for me the question of the human capital and the people necessary to certain degrees. I mean, many of the countries import a lot of their labor supply. We know many of the countries also have very young populations, so there's an opportunity there to bring them into this network. Dr. Martinez, where do you see, is there enough labor, and how do they overcome some of those challenges?
In the GPA, we have a specific working track called the Future of Work, and is how artificial intelligence is coming to automatize so much that eventually some low-level jobs or tasks will be taken over by automated systems. The great opportunity for me that the region has is that it can be a test bed of what AI can do to make everything more agile, without having to fire people, which is the big problem that we have in the G7 and the G20, where, yes, we want to put AI everywhere, but we have to take into account that, there's tens of thousands of people carrying out these jobs, and it has to be gradual. Whereas if you go to a country of the future, then not only you benefit from making tasks already taken over by machines, the population then takes over really purposeful tasks that are much more important, but also the sooner you digitize everything, the sooner you start having historical data that will make your predictability and all the analytics you do much more infallible. Because AI needs historical data, right. And AI needs real-world evidence data that comes from industrial IoT and blockchain. So I see a massive, massive jump in the next 5 years into the countries that have this roadmap, and they deploy it, and then everybody trying to catch up. This is what we will see in 5 years alone.
Matteo, when you talk to clients, how do they see not just the opportunities, but the risks? What are the risks of coming into the region that you see or advise your clients about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for sure, there are risks linked to the ability to deliver at the pace which the country has set up. The pace of change is very, very fast. Right? And these require I would say, fully established ecosystem, which you cannot only, bring by having, for example, manufacturing facilities there, but all the supplier, all the shipping, all the ecosystem. So that require a fairly mature ecosystem, which enable a company to be to deliver on the manufacturing side, for example, on some of the projects. So what are some of the big risks? I mean, for sure, number one, as you mentioned, is human capital. We're short of people. We're short of people across different levels. High-skilled engineers, typically, and also the ones that are mostly blue collar that are able to deliver the project. We've done a study where there are around 10 million workers that need to be added from now until 2030.
We need how many?
10 million.
A year.
In total.
In total,
that
okay.
need to be added to deliver on these giga projects.
Right.
So that's one. Number two, it's around, or as I was saying before, the entire, say, green agenda, which links to the green material. For example, green copper, green aluminum, green cement. Those are some of the focus that the country, GDC in particular, and also Saudi are pushing to. But there is not enough green material available in the world, right?
Right.
So how do you then build, that also ecosystem that enable you to deliver? So I would say human capital, and say a bit more advanced green material. This is the one that the most biggest challenge.
Oscar, on this question of ESG and sustainability, specifically, your deal is with Aramco, obviously one of the world's largest petroleum companies. Is there tension there as you talk about building a sustainable logistics hub there? Or how do they view it?
No, I
does
think
DHL view it?
there's not necessarily tension there. I think because Aramco themselves wants to drive that agenda as well. Because in the end, the energy transition needs to also be driven by those that actually sit on that side. Just
Right.
as we are a transport company and a logistics company need to drive that agenda just as much. So, no, I don't think there's tension. I think there's more, actually the opposite, rather the opposite, because there's ability, there's capability and capacity and capital to actually make those things happen over time.
So they really are viewed in tandem, right? I mean, that you build sustainability
Absolutely.
into the equation, right? Right. I know, Dr. Martinez, you've been talking and thinking about this sustainability question as well. And from what you're hearing, what's your perspective on where that stands in the region?
Well, we already see that the top 10 most digitized ports in the world are building everything with decarbonization strategies. Also because the 17 principles of the UN need to be implemented by everyone is at the top of the agenda. But also that allows you to be a lot more energy efficient. But the big challenge of the world is not going to be that AI will take the jobs or the robots. It's energy efficiency and the water access.
Right. Water.
And that's why the supply chain is going to completely transform itself in something that we will be amazed in the next 5 years. Is geopolitics, everything coming into place. Whomever has built, this reminds me of when in 2010, Mark Anderson wrote, "Software is eating the world," meaning we all need to digitize our businesses, and some people didn't get it, and those were the ones that pay the consequences 5-7 years later. This is the moment to really to transform the supply chain.
Right. We have a question actually for Oscar. With climate change, geopolitical conflict, should customers just expect to pay more for shipping going forward?
If they don't optimize, yes, right? Because that's the
But
point.
customers, the endpoint customers, or well, I guess because the companies I'm ordering from will then pass the cost along to me if they don't optimize.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
So the point I'm making is that and I think it builds on your point is if you wouldn't change anything in the supply chain and you would just add to that the whole transition. Yes, of course, then there's a cost increase, and let's not fool each other. I mean, that actually passes on in the supply chain and ends up with the end customer. So that will be there. But if you optimize, the further we optimize supply chains, and the further by using data, by using robotic solutions, by using alternative ways of building up the supply chain, you can cover a part of that.
So the world you're describing sounds great. But are we actually going to get there? I think I'll let Dr. Martinez answer that question.
We are getting there. We are getting there, and I know that the minute some of the ports, some of the companies have implemented parts of the supply chain, the optimization was incredible, and the cost cutting, of course. What I see the momentum is to then establish the roadmap, very clear deliverables, plan for the next 18 months. In 18 months, whomever is on this roadmap will start capitalizing on the investment.
Wow. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.